Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, TIFF Senior International Programmer for Canada, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Lowell Dean, a writer and director who gave us the Wolf Cop films, which would ensure his place in the Pantheon if he'd never made anything else, but he's also got 2 films coming out this year. Dark Match, a horror wrestling mashup starring Aisha Issa, Sarah Canning, and Chris Jericho that invades theaters across Canada this Friday, January 31st, and goes live on Shudder in the US on the same day, and Die Alone, a post-apocalyptic thriller starring Carrie-Anne Moss, Douglas Smith, and Frank Grillo coming later this year. They're both worth your time, and you should keep an eye out for them. Lowell picked Superman the movie, the genre-defining 1978 blockbuster that only seems risky in retrospect. Despite years of challenges, casting trouble, and an impossibly complicated production and post-production, Richard Donner got everything right, finding a way to bring the DC Comics hero to the screen with the right balance of gravitas and goofiness, finding a Clark and Lois for the ages in Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder, and surrounding them with a game-supporting cast, groundbreaking visual effects, and the greatest score ever composed for a superhero movie, full stop. Obviously, I love this picture as much as Lowell does, so this episode's really special. But it's not about me. This is someone else's movie.
Superman is honestly the movie I think I know the best of all films I've ever seen in my life, because it's been with me since I was actually a child. Like it was my first memories of watching movies that weren't Disney was Superman. And then it evolved with me, or I should say I evolved with it as I got older and got interested in film itself. So then I feel like it's an evergreen project because you can enjoy it as a kid as a movie and you don't pick up any of the double entendres or witticisms that maybe you get when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s. And but coming at it from someone who wants to make films, it suddenly became like the best teacher because every aspect of the film is like technical innovation, story innovation, brilliant performances. It's a new movie every 35 minutes or so. So it's my comfort food film, and I could lie and say I have some really highbrow film as like the film that I love the most or watch the most, but it is I would say me deep down in my core.
Yeah, it's funny. I love it too, and I always underestimate it. Every time I come back, it's just like, no, this is actually, it's a really, really smart. And yeah, it's mature and it's grown up, but it's also just there's that point. I did a thing about Jaws for TIFF my first year there, and we just did this little video and I had this throwaway line about how it's during the town meeting sequence. And I said, like, someday I'm going to tell children this is a Robert Altman scene.
Yeah.
And there's enough of the new Hollywood in Donner's work as well, especially in Superman, where it's like the next movie he made was Inside Moves. It was this tiny little drama about a bunch of people, and Superman functions on that level in its second half. Like the first half is absolutely mythic and comic book origin story, and I'm always amazed at how little screen time Glenn Ford has to play Jonathan Kent and how much he leaves us with.
Doesn't he? Yeah.
But all of that stuff is there to build to this great explosion of, the John Williams score crests after the big journey. And there's Christopher Reeve revealed for the first time and he flies away. And then immediately we're just dropped into a New York movie in 1977 when they shot it. And it's completely disarming and absolutely like adorable and charming to pivot from, this is the comic book stuff. I've given you everything you think you want. Now we're just going to have fun with it. And then it becomes playful and sexy and contemporary and just so goddamn charming. And I'm a little older than you are. So did you first see it? What was your first experience?
Honestly, I don't even remember.
It was just always there,
So
right?
it was always there. I'm gonna guess it was VHS. I actually was born the year it came out.
Oh, okay.
So I saw it. But I don't know how I saw it. I don't know if there was like a revival or something, and my parents took me when I was really young. All I remember is I was obsessed with Superman. I would dress up like him, even not on Halloween. And I was of the generation of absolutely, growing up on VHS. So it was muddled for me where even Superman 1 began and 2 began. It was just all one big thing to me. and then later as a filmmaker to study the films deeply and hear about what Donner went through making them and the situation with one and two. It just became even more fascinating and kind of sad to me.
Yeah, it's always been this treasure to me because I saw it on its opening day in a theater too close to the screen.
Yeah.
I was 10. It was
Hmm.
December 1978, and my dad was driving me and my brother back from the Catskills. Or no, we must like December 15th. We must have been on the way there. And it was snowing and we pulled over because the was like highway driving was impossible. We saw it at some strip mall movie theater in Buffalo. And I have this really clear and vague memory at the same time. I don't know which theater it was. It was just someplace off the freeway. And it was late. It must have been like a 9 o'clock show. And it didn't matter.
Yeah.
It had us. And I was exactly the right age,
Yeah.
obviously. And having the frame fill my entire field of vision because we were like it was late. We bought I don't think we bought the last tickets, but we got there pretty close to the start of the show, and so the only seats were down front, and it was like an IMAX experience to a little kid, right? Like it was just this massive, overwhelming experience, and it was real. It was everything happening on the screen with people flying around. This is what it must feel like. And even the double entendres went right over my head. But the audience, I do remember the audience giggling in a really weird way that I didn't understand at the how big are you, how tall are you moment.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I'm jealous. That would have been great to see it in that way.
It was fantastic. And then to realize that there was a movie that gave me everything I wanted from a Superman experience, but was also playing for a different crowd at a different level. Like it was mostly for me,
Hmm.
but it was, yeah, it's exactly what you said. There was more to discover as I got older. And so I just became utterly devoted to it in the same way that I do think that as strong as John Williams' work has been in other films, and I love the Raiders March, like classical music, but I think that this score and this movie belong together in a way that you can just point to and instantly understand like what kind of movie this is going to be by how much fun that fanfare is and how long those credits are.
Yes, and you don't care because it's exciting and it's engaging. And I mean, this sounds like an insult, but it's not. I feel like the movie's greedy. I feel like it wants to do literally everything and say, here's the full movie experience. And that's why I love it so much, is like I'm always shocked when people like write it off as being like cheesy or corny or
Corny, I
camp.
heard a lot. Yeah.
And but to me, it's like I think it has aged better than most superhero films did or will. And it's a version of the character that I think stands head and shoulders above anything I've seen since.
Yeah, it's remarkable how definitive Christopher Reeve's performance is. Like people are constantly pulling up that one clip of him shifting from Clark to Superman and back to Clark again without makeup, without any kind of, costume change. And yes, that's acting, of course.
Yeah.
But what people miss is how Clark and Superman are the same person. It's a
Mhm.
physical trick, absolutely, but he is playing a consistent character throughout. He is allowed to be amused as Clark because people don't see him and do little things here and there, but he also fumbles when he's Superman once or
Yeah.
twice
Yeah.
because he's a human being. Like he's not obviously he's an alien and all of that is in there, but the thing that the show the thing that the movie understands that I don't think any other version of Superman did before. Maybe some of the comics, but it hadn't really happened yet because what you're seeing is the work of people who don't they're not obliged to honor every piece of the comic books lore. They're creating a story from all this stuff, but they're not worried about what the fans will say, and they're not worried about their own expectations. And I think Tom Mankiewicz, who did most of the rewriting,
Hmm.
said that he didn't know very much about Superman, and Donner said that he was like his association was the TV show, I think, with George Reeves, which is just not very good in the
Hmm.
end because of all of its limitations, but also because Superman in the 1950s and 60s just wasn't that well defined. Um, and then they realized, like, no, he was raised by humans. He thinks he's from Kansas. He discovers all these things about himself, and he learns. But the Clark that we see in Metropolis is integrated. Like he's someone who carries the weight of the world on his hands but also just kind of wants to kiss a girl. Like he still has all these little tiny human behaviors that run through him as Superman. I'm like, that's why it's not cheesy that he rescues a cat from a tree, because he doesn't want a child to be sad. And his anguish over not being able to save everyone. There's nothing in any other comic book movie. I truly don't think anyone was willing to try the little tiny whimper that Christopher Reeve gives Superman when he pulls, we're going to jump around in spoilers for a 50-year-old movie, when he pulls Lois's body out of that car and puts her down and her head slips a little and he makes this little sound. It's heartbreaking. It's the most human thing. And as good as Brandon Routh is in Superman Returns, and as much as I think Henry Cavill could have played a really interesting Superman if the movies around him had understood what he was doing, he gets it. Zack Snyder never did. Reeves' humanity, Christopher Reeves' humanity, is the defining factor of all three of the first Superman. Like in the fourth one, everybody's compromised. In the third one, he's second banana to himself and to Richard Pryor. But in the first two, it's not that you believe a man can fly, it's that you believe he's a man.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, I think it's alchemy that got those first two so right versus all the other attempts. And I don't know. I think Christopher Reeve is obviously the secret sauce, and Richard Donner, who I never think gets enough credit as a director. But I do agree that it's the one version. I think it's earnestness. I think people are afraid of earnestness. I think everybody writes it off as like a weakness, or like, oh, it's, we said corny earlier, but I think my guess is, as someone who makes films and aspires to control tone, I think people get scared. I think the idea of someone in these bright colors, like you said, letting out a whimper, having this like deep, dark emotional feeling, confronting all these insane things, being in a three-way love affair with a woman and himself, another version of himself. I think earnestness is not something to fear. It's just something to hold sacred and actually do correctly. And that's why, I remember when the X-Men movies came out, being like furious that they didn't respect or attempt to do the costumes. They're like, oh, and they make a joke about this is cheesy. I'm like, no, you just not approaching it. Like if this has worked for decades in comics, sure, it's another medium, but you can translate these things if you put the thought and time in and don't just say people are going to disregard it. It's silly. People love this stuff, if you take it seriously. And that doesn't mean you have to be slavish to the original context. It just means interpret it.
Yeah. And that's where we get, Hackman's Luthor and Ned Beatty's Otis and Kidder's exactly Lois Lane, right? Who's also completely different, but also exactly right from the versions we'd seen before. Like Lois, as a comic character, is, unself-aware, I think is the best way to put it. Like she was defined for years and years as like needing to chase a story to her own detriment, always putting herself in danger. And that's here too, but in a really smart way, where Margot Kidder just bullshits her way into every situation as like, this Lois will say anything and do anything to get a story, but she's also capable of wonder and responds to things in the most pragmatic way. Her line readings on pretty much everything, like How Many Peas and Rapists, like just little throwaways.
I was thinking of that exact line. It's like the His Girl Friday stuff when they're going through the office. It's true. Like they do maintain the smartness, but you're right. She feels more dimensional here too, because she's like got foibles and concerns, and she has blind spots for things. She's not just like, I'm going to solve this case like a good gumshoe.
Yeah. And she's human and he's human, and the attraction is believable. Just that. And the other thing too, the fact that they established the world of Metropolis through, it's not even exposition, because it is just New York. There's no pretense at all. And subsequent films just get sillier and sillier about how Metropolis and Gotham are across the bay from each other. It's like, whatever, come on.
Statue of Liberty. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a borough. Just let it be. But, but it has, every time I watch it, I'm so childishly, it reconnects me to the childish glee of having Jackie Coogan say, like, offhandedly, and like, he's the fastest typist I've ever seen. And in the audience, you go like, yeah, of course he would be. But it knows what it's got. Like the script knows what it's got, and then Donner, I think the minute he had Reeve and Kidder together, and those like the stories of their chemistry reads are fascinating, and we can go into it if you want to, and how the idea that anyone could have ever wanted Robert Redford to play this part. Nothing against Robert Redford, but he's already impossible.
Redford, yeah.
Yeah. It would be weird and distracting. And I think on some level, everything about the production would have to condescend to the use of a superstar in
Yeah.
this role. Like it would bring its own camp with it. And in Reeve's performance, you get an emotional honesty that just refuses to be made fun of. Like he makes fun of himself in a different way, but you can't write this movie off because it isn't trying. It's trying so hard to be a three-dimensional human experience that also just happens to be about, people flying around the world trying to save us from ourselves. And the other thing too, and this is the thing that Superman Returns gets right, which like it bothers me that movie is so good because so much of it has to be just recontextualized as that guy.
Yeah.
But the thing that it carries forward is that until Luthor arrives as a villain, there's plenty of shit to fix first. Like the world is a mess. The helicopter accident is an accident. It's not even that someone didn't do their job. It's just like wear and tear. It's the world is always coming apart. Weirdly, the first Superman film is a better Final Destination movie than half of the Final Destination movies.
I never thought about that.
I think that's where they got it. I think that's where the device of just following a chaotic event from the tiny thing to the big thing, I think that's where it started, because I don't remember seeing anybody approach this sort of cause and effect chaos before. And if there is one, if there's either a horror film or a genre film or anything, other than somebody who's just like, I think there was a movie in the 40s about somebody with bad luck, that maybe these things like that, but it was only ever one thing going wrong. Here it's an event cascade that leads to each disaster. And then even once the nukes go off in the climax and other things are falling apart, we still get to watch the progression. Nothing happens in this movie that isn't explained.
Yeah, that's very true. And you do get your cake and eat it too in terms of it's like a dream list of like natural disasters and certain kinds of scenarios. And even when he like breaks into Luthor's underground fortress and the gauntlet he has to go through with the freezing and the fire and the gunfire, it's like there's someone had a checklist somewhere of like everything a kid would want to see. But again, you talk about performances and it's still got such great mature performances. Even one of my favorite actually memories of childhood is discussing Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor with my dad, who as a kid, all through growing up, that's who my dad references as the best villain of all time. He's like the greatest criminal mind, the greatest criminal mind, even though he was often so oafish and surrounded by oafs. Like, how did he ever think it was just his hubris, I guess, that thought he would successfully take over the world when he has Otis as his second in command?
Yeah, I think the point there is that that's the signal to us that Luthor's not as smart as he thinks he is, right? Because he has to surround himself with idiots to feel smart.
Yeah, I love I'm sure if you're steeped in Superman, the story of Gene Hackman when he was hired and he had a mustache and he didn't want to lose the mustache. And Richard Donner put on a fake mustache just to be like, in solidarity, I'll shave mine if you shave yours. I can't imagine that working well with a director and actor, but Richard Donner is obviously a very charming man.
Yeah, and it keeps it from dating too, because it's set in it looks like the 70s, but there's nothing in it that other than like Hackman's perm, and I think that's just the way his hair looked anyway.
Yeah,
there is a timelessness in its specificity somehow, right? Because Metropolis will always look like whatever the current like world-class city thing looks like, so that plays for it too. And the foolishness and the silliness that Hackman has isn't winking to the audience that he's not taking the material seriously. That's the thing that I find absolutely fascinating. Gene Hackman is one of those performers who never looks like he's acting ever. He always sounds like himself. He always looks like himself. And playing a larger than life comic book supervillain is still just like Gene Hackman being mildly annoyed with his underlings.
Oh, he's still got such fire going. Yeah, he's got fire in his eyes. He's still like, he's very committed and you believe it. I think, it's no different than him in Royal Tenenbaums. Like, you are that guy. It's like you said, he's still a variation on a slight theme, but he's fully right in that world.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. And then, of course, like all films that will be watched over and over again by kids, then you get to go on and discover the careers of everybody else, which I find delightful in its own weird way. Like this was the movie that introduced me to Ned Beatty.
Yeah,
And he made it, what, 2 years after Network?
that blows my mind.
It was just this thing that people did. They put big stars in movies like this to justify the budget and to make the grown-ups come and see them. But really, I mean, I hate the term, but it is a four quadrant picture. It's a crowd pleaser. It makes you enjoy all the foolishness and all the silliness, but also appreciate just how honest and real the stakes can feel. I mean, this is, again, this is a movie that has huge stakes, massive casualties, although everything is, made right in the end because Superman as a character cannot allow people to suffer or die. And when it's all happening, it's believable. I always forget that there is a mushroom cloud in this movie. We see the bomb go off.
Yeah, yeah.
I was too young to actually take that seriously, but that was like this was the Cold War. People were conditioned to be terrified of this sort of thing, and it's just no, it's a plot point. It'll be okay, and you believe it. You feel like whatever's going on is somehow going to be all right in the end.
It's the kitchen sink. It's like I actually in my mind I classify it as like a full-on epic because it's like not unlike the Ten Commandments or Gone with the Wind or something. Like you are following a gigantic journey. It feels like you're going through different periods of even cinematic storytelling, like the 1950s to like you said, the 1970s. And I mean, yeah, it's trying to be timeless, but there's obvious markers of when it was shot. But I still think it's timeless. I really do. Even with the effects. I think they still are, if you're in that mode and your brain is in the movie, you can just be with it.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where you have to remind the kids today that there's no CG, that nothing in this is digital. Digital did not, it wasn't an option at the time. But what was it, the Zoptic process, the front projection that they came up with for Reeve was revolutionary. And
Yeah.
for people who think it's dated, look at Superman 4 where they couldn't afford it and how
The same four shot
yeah.
over and over. That movie. And as a kid, like, your age that you went to see the original Superman, that was the age I saw four. That was my first cinematic Superman movie. And I was so young that I still very much enjoyed it because I had the context of all the other films. But I do remember being like, never really excited to revisit it. As long as like it would never win in a battle of which Superman to watch, let's say. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And rightly so. Because that's just not how this needs to be done. But it is like it's an interesting template for how not to make one. And it does make you see immediately the things that they're trying to steal from the originals that the Canon group wanted to bring forward but couldn't afford to. And then the things they think won't matter, but the things that, and those are the exact same things that Richard Donner took care of the first time around. I interviewed him once. It was for a special commemorative edition of the Goonies. And so we had to spend more time talking about that, which he did not like. Like he's not a fan of his own. He wasn't a fan. Yeah, well, he says it's all just screaming children. Like he watches it now,
okay.
and it's just like I just remember trying to manage all this chaos. I don't think he looks down on it, but it wasn't a pleasant experience for him.
Fair
And
enough.
I just opened the conversation by saying, look, we could spend 2 hours just talking about Superman. And I apologize that I'm going to force in a couple of questions. And he's like, I'm proud. It's fine. You can ask me whatever you want. And in the end, it was just like, what did it feel like to know you got it right? And he said, well, I mean, Superman 2 fell apart. I didn't really get it right. And this was right after the director's cut had been released. And he's like, no, only now, 25 years later, can I point to people, however long it was, can I point to it and say, this is what I wanted to do all along. But the first movie, yeah, the first one felt good. It's just like, that's honestly all I need.
Yeah.
The sense that when you start, like my stock question when I'm interviewing people about film is, when did you know this was going to work? Like at what point was it during the screenwriting? Was it during the casting, post-production? When did you know you had it? And he said they never knew until they screened it for kids, until he screened it for like family audience.
That's crazy. I mean, talk about trusting the gut because like I absolutely can relate to the idea of I want to try a thing and I have an idea and in my head it's really awesome, but once you cobble together an army and usually someone else's money, you start being like, I hope this is working, and you never know. So, I mean, I would be so scared with a movie of that scope and that budget and those days and that just giant machine. But obviously his gut works, and it's not like he did one movie that connected with audiences and then one and done, which there's a lot of those filmmakers. That's why I love him, especially because I feel like he's to this day underrated and a little unsung because maybe because he hopped through genres so much, maybe because he got bored. And but I mean, he The Omen, he can do great horror. Lethal Weapon, the all of them, the basically one of the seminal action movies of the 90s, which is like the best era of action movies, 80s and 90s. So um, I think he's just someone who does his stock and trade is just doing it right, finding the tone.
Yeah. I think his other strength is in encouraging the audience to share how much fun he's having making it.
Yes,
Because
yes.
there are so many, just look at Man of Steel, right? This is an incredibly serious, heavy-handed retelling of a story we already kind of know,
Yeah.
but there's not a lot of joy in it, and either in the storytelling or in the script itself. And Donner, he opens with a child's voice, right? Like he's encouraging you to get back to this mindset, even if you're not 10 yourself. He's telling you what kind of movie you're in for, and then Krypton is very, very serious, and Earth is not. It's a great transition. It's just showing the audience that we did the myth making, we did the heavy handed stuff. You know where we are now. Let's just go forward and watch a kid kick a football into space.
Yeah. And be a teenager and wonder why he can't show off. Yeah.
Yeah, which God, I mean, if we only have this little time with like the Jeff East version of Clark, the young Clark Kent, those two scenes, or three scenes, I guess, just the joy of running around in secret, that like running alongside the train and all that stuff, which just obviously it makes no sense, but it's perfect for a comic book representation of what you could do if you
Of Lois being on the train. Yeah.
yeah, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's laying seeds that we don't know are seeds, but also just punctuating it with his dad dying in front of him,
Yeah.
because no, this is why Superman can enjoy who he is. He'll Something always happens.
That scene gets me every time. I think about that scene a lot because it's so understated and it's just a beautiful definition of like the joke of what do you get the guy who has everything? What challenge can you put before the guy who can do anything? This is the one thing he absolutely has nothing. He can do nothing. He's powerless, and it's moving, to this day. And when I think about the young Clark stuff, I think about the fact that I was just always mesmerized by his performance and like, how was he so accurate? And then only later when you dig into the making of it, you're like, oh, he's so accurate because it's not his voice. It's Christopher Reeve's voice. And he's wearing this wig and these contacts and stuff. So I guess that's movie magic. But as a kid, you're just like, wow, that's phenomenal casting.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week I wrote about the Blu-ray arrivals of Conclave and We Live in Time, and the new stunning 4K restoration of A Bridge Too Far in a very spiffy box set from Via Vision's Impact line in Australia. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I mean, I think it would have worked just as well had it been Jeff East himself, because he's perfect. He's good. That's like this. All you need for these three scenes are somebody who can look sad like look happy, look sad, have the range, because he's not formed yet, right? We just need to see the raw pieces of this kid who's going to become the adult Superman, the adult Clark Kent. But I guess the decision to dub him, I mean, I don't know what Jeffy's voice sounded like, so maybe it was really high or squeaky or something. There might have been a reason.
I mean, all that said, his performance comes through, even if you take away his voice, like his eyes, he's doing so much. Like, it's a great performance.
Yeah, and he matches Reeve. He looks like physically, he's a tall, well-built young man who has broad shoulders and can convincingly look like the next actor to play the character in the movie. But it just gives you so much of the world too. It's all exteriors. I don't think we ever see Clark indoors in the Smallville sequences.
Just I think in his
Once at
house.
home in the
Oh
house, right
no,
before he
we're in the
leaves.
mum with we're with her. He's already left.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's outside. Yeah, just to isolate him a little bit more from everybody. The visual storytelling, again, it's comic book panel logic, right? Like you're just creating, and what are storyboards if not comic panels? You're building out this analog, and then all of a sudden he's like Christopher Reeve, who's ducking through doorways and kind of moving around to hide his size and be incredibly light on his feet, even though he weighs like 500 pounds because of whatever's going on with Kryptonian metabolism. And there's a tenderness that comes in once Reeve takes over, like a physical gentleness. And that was the other thing that Donner talked about, not with me, but in interviews that he said the verisimilitude, like figuring out how a flying man moving at very quick speeds can catch someone without shattering their bones with
Yeah.
the inertia that he's built up. And it was big, and you can see it in the helicopter sequence. He actually slows down. The camera is moving with him, so you don't notice it right away, but he is matching the speed of descent before he can catch Lois. It's just they thought all of it through because in 1977 they had to get this thing going because audiences wouldn't have accepted what we have now, like the weightless digital. I mean, you
Yeah.
work with practical effects as often as you can. You know exactly how much value there is in being able to touch something on screen and have a tactile connection between the filmmakers and the audience. I don't know that. I mean, I'm reserving judgment because I hope James Gunn can pull it off, but I don't know if you can make a modern Superman film with modern technology and be as satisfying as something that was put together by hand.
I am hopeful. I'm always hopeful because not just because that's what the character's all about, but because every time someone says they're making a Superman movie, I want it to be great. Like
Yeah.
I used to dream of making a Superman movie, and now I just like we're so inundated with superhero culture. I just hope whatever is up next is good. Um, I wasn't a huge fan of Zack Snyder's take on it. I wanted to like it so badly, and
Mm-hmm.
I went in. The Hans Zimmer score is stirring, but I knew pretty quickly, even with like the stuff with his father and how he comes to his end. I was like, what is this? What is happening here? So it lost me pretty quickly emotionally. And James Gunn, the thing that gives me hope about his Superman, other than I like the brightness and the boldness of the colors, is that he is someone who's good at balancing humor and heart. I feel like everybody, myself included, when he was announced as making Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm like, what? What a weird choice. Like, why are they making this movie with a tree and a raccoon? So for that reason alone, and then seeing what he pulled off with that, I will go in with high hopes, which is usually a mistake. But you never know. I hope it's not overstuffed with characters. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, there seem to be a lot of heroes running around in it, and maybe
Yeah.
villains too. But
Yeah.
oh man, I watched the trailer and he gets crypto right, so
Yeah.
I'm
And
in. I'm all in.
I'm more hopeful for him than most filmmakers I would even think of. So here's hoping.
Yeah, yeah, and the casting seems strong. I've seen David
Yeah.
Cornsweet in a couple of films, and Brosnahan as Lois makes perfect sense if you're chasing the Margot Kidder of it all, which it seems like they are.
Yeah.
And I also think like Gunn and I are about the same age. I think he's reached back to the same inspirational points, which are the Silver Age comics and that I grew up reading, and Donner and Superman. I mean, that's the thing about Superman Returns, right? Which is a direct sequel to Superman 2 with new cast members that pretends no time, like 5 years have passed instead of 25. And it's a love song to what Donner accomplished. And if it doesn't quite land the same way because we're more cynical and everything else is different and everyone's comparing it constantly to Christopher Reeve,
That's the problem, I think. Yeah.
yeah. But
For me, it felt like a fan film,
mm-hmm.
the best budget fan film you could ever make. But to me, that was one moment where it's like, well, maybe we should strike out a bit on our own. Maybe we should try something, but maybe it was just too close. It was, I know in that era when it came out, all I wanted was more Donner Superman. So I understand the rationale.
Yeah. but it's such a high bar to clear. That's what I mean. Like if you, as much as I like Tim Burton's Batman, which came along, what, 11 years later, it's a comic book movie, and Superman, the Donner vision of Superman is less constrained. Like it is the film that asks the question, what would it be like if there was a Superman in the real world? And you don't have monsters, like there's no kaiju, there's no super weapon, there's no, beyond the inclusion of an alien from Krypton.
Yeah.
Everything else is more or less plausible. And again, Luther's scheme is, I mean, it's Trumpian. It's completely rational for, I mean, other than the avarice that and cruelty involved in, causing the deaths of millions of innocent people, as Hackman says, and Miss Tessmacher's mom, who lives in Hackensack. It's a real estate scam. Like, it's completely reasonable as that story goes. If this was if this movie was told exclusively from Lois Lane's point of view, she would be all the presidents mending it. She would be uncovering this this conspiracy, this real estate scam that was some sort of like it's. I'm garbling my own point now, but it is distressingly otherwise credible.
And I think I love that. I mean, I think that's why it sings so much for me and why he seems all the more fascinating is because it's not muddled with all that stuff, and maybe that's also why it's more four quadrant than a lot of comic book movies. It's like be careful what you wish for, old superhero movies of that era are here's a superhero, here's their origin, we're just going to repeat this forever. Everybody got sick of it. Now we're in a world where it's like play catch up. Here's 15 post-credit scenes. Here's a character in it for one moment just so you realize they're going to be in 3 movies from now. And it's just all exhausting, and it feels like we're trying to pretend there's this big universal plan for a universe, but it also doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like it's just like spinning plates to be like, just keep paying attention, keep paying attention. And what I love about Superman is it's not trying to market to you. It's not trying to grow a business. It's trying to create the best possible one film, or in this case, 2 films. And to me, that's why it will stand the test of time more than like 15 of the Marvel movies that came out. And I'm not like an anti-Marvel person, but it feels like so many of them, with the exception of like the original Iron Man, aren't trying to be a movie. They're trying to be a chapter in a story, in a book, in a franchise, in a marketing scheme.
Yeah, I mean, you could say the same about Bond, but I think the Bond films, that franchise seemed to me to define what the Marvel movies want to do, where you really can have the same adventure over and over and over and over again. You just change a couple of details, introduce different villains, maybe replace the actors when you have to. But yeah, the audience doesn't mind because there's only one every 2 or 3 years. Marvel making 3 to 4 films a year just oversaturated instantly, and it sort of laid bare the plan there. And the idea, of course, with Superman and Superman 2 is that 2 would debut the following year, and that fell apart very quickly. And had, when the Southlands took it away from Donner and had Richard Lester reshoot a whole chunk of it, and it ended up being 2.5 years, right, 81, before it finally opened. But even then, the fact that you can spend that time with the Phantom Zone villains, who will be the antagonists in the second movie, and not have it feel like they're laying track. Like it just feels like a big drama for Jor-El. So we give Marlon Brando something to do to justify the money they're paying him, but also it establishes how Krypton works and where Superman comes from, and then never comes back in the first film. Like it's just not about that. It's about who he is on Earth.
That, I never thought about that until now. It's absolutely like a Marvel thing. It's like the original, like, hey, here's some bad guys. We're gonna spend 5 minutes talking about them and not talk to them again. Yeah. Trust us, it'll matter later.
Yeah, there's even more of them in the extended version, which I find fascinating. Like they kill a guard, and there's just extra stuff before they get captured. And rightly, they realize that doesn't actually matter for this movie, because their crimes are then laid out in the tribunal, and we hear about how bad they are. And it didn't bother me at all that we don't see them again in the movie. It's just like, oh no, this is how Krypton is. There's there's bad guys, there's good guys, there's a sense of justice, and these are the things that are imparted to the baby
Mhm.
on his way to Earth. And none of it will, it informs us and our understanding of the drama that's playing out, but it's irrelevant to Clark because
Yeah.
again, he's adopted by the Kents and he starts on Earth. His life begins in Kansas,
Hmm.
which is the way it needs to be. I'm really curious about how Gunn will handle it in the new one, just because I truly don't think we need it. And General Zod wasn't even a villain until the second Superman that Donner made, but then he's been inserted in he's become the big bad in Superman's mythology, which inevitably he rears his head in every single Superman project. It's like, you don't need him. It's like
Because
Khan.
he was
Don't bring
done
Khan
right.
back.
Yeah, it's because he was done right. I think as a comic lover, I would do Brainiac. That's all I'm saying. I think we're ready for Brainiac. Yeah.
I like the idea of Brainiac. I'm curious to see him. Apparently, he's in the new Harley Quinn series. I'm kind
Oh,
of curious about that.
the cartoon
The
one?
cartoon, yeah, which
Yeah.
is another blast. And I'm sort of
Yes, I
glad
love
that,
that.
yeah, the new season has them in Metropolis. I haven't started watching it yet, but that sounds like it could be really fun. And I kind of hope we don't see Superman because I don't want
We
him.
will. I think I already saw him in the trailer, but
Oh, damn
maybe
it.
it'll just be like a little cameo, and he'll be a unique interpretation if we're lucky.
Yeah, I don't want him spoiled.
Mhm.
Not even spoiled. It's weird. I didn't think I was this protective of the character. And then every time somebody gets him wrong, I'm just like, no, come on. My Batman contains multitudes. He can be any version of anything. But Reeve was so definitive as Superman to my 10-year-old eyes that Ian McIntyre, a friend of mine who has done also a friend of the podcast, said once that the whole point of Superman isn't a power fantasy. It's what if someone who had power was kind. And it's the thing that Snyder forgot, which is that, Clark will do anything to save another person and spare them. The tragedy of being caught in the crossfire of a giant superpower 9/11, which is the end of Man of Steel, and tens of thousands of people die. And it's like, that's obscene to me about a Superman movie.
It's like violence porn. It's that's why I fully agree with you about Reeve and Donner and their Superman being. I mean, it's just about having the power, and people I think see it as like boring. It's the Captain America problem. It's like, oh, who cares? But it's like the morality required to carry that gigantic burden of I can do all these things and to do it or to not do it. I find that very fascinating. I'm actually offended when people write these characters off as like the boring one, It's like, no, you don't understand. They are the heart and soul of all of this. It's like a litmus test for do you have kindness in you if you see these characters as just blah. I just want Batman. He's sad and he has guns, which he shouldn't.
Right. No, I agree. My favorite Superman stories are the ones that are ethical, like the ones that have the conflict with him being the world's Boy Scout and not being able to intervene for reasons he sets for himself. Like he has no limitations except the ones he gives himself. And I find that incredibly fascinating. That's another thing I'm really curious to see. Like, do they set this Daily Planet in the real world as we know it, with social media ruining everything and newspapers dying? It doesn't look like it. It looks like the planet is still a palace.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very curious about that too. The bar is low as long as he actually is Clark Kent. I'll be happy. Actually has glasses and like, has a dual personality, which I actually think is important to the character. I think it's, both Superman and I would say Spider-Man. That's the most appealing part to me is that duality of I can't have it all. How do I help people? And how do I protect my life without letting everyone in my life down? And that's another criticism I have of the recent Spider-Man films is I feel like they kind of lost a bit of that duality of of balancing your lives and trying to save the world at the same time, which I think Sam Raimi's films got very right.
Yeah. I wonder if it isn't rooted in the whole mask thing. Like everybody on the Marvel movies keeps finding reasons to take their masks off so we can see the actors, which is, again, the most important thing about any performance is the face. And of course,
Yeah.
you want to see Robert Downey Jr. and you want to see Tom Holland and you want to see everybody, but you don't have that problem with Superman. You're
No,
always seeing his feelings are right there.
that's the thing that people probably find stupid about Superman is like glasses on, glasses off, glasses on. Who are you? But I think that goes back to the conversation of earnestness. And I think like to me, it's not a question of I'm changing that because it's dumb. It's more, okay, these are the rules that we've been handed for this particular brand of mythology. How can we smartly honor it? You know, what's the most interesting way? And sometimes it's just a throwaway line of dialogue, or sometimes, you know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
very clever ways to even just have Lois say a throwaway line, and suddenly you're like, you've rationalized it, and we get a chuckle out of it too.
Yeah. I mean, Kidder just lets you believe she's distracted. She's not,
Yeah.
she's just not paying attention. That's Clark, nice, right? Like she doesn't listen to him when he's
Yeah.
Clark, and she's constantly ahead of him as a reporter, which is also great. I love that they're casting someone who's a little older as Lois because she should be. She's established, she has a career that the new animated series, My Adventures with Superman, makes them colleagues and also contemporaries, which is fine. They're all starting out together, and it doesn't matter because by the end of the first season, she figures it out anyway. It's adorable. Have you watched it?
I haven't yet. No.
It's
Yeah.
really cute. Like it's an anime styled version of Superman in a present day metropolis. And it's really, really fun. And it gets it. And Jack Quaid is voicing Superman, which is like
Okay. He's
once
everywhere.
again, he is, yeah, another genre role, but he just loves it so much. And he does get something about Clark's earnestness and also Superman's wobbly resolve because he's conflicted about everything. He gets that in a way that a lot of the other actors have let slide, but he's
Mhm.
also playing like a 21-year-old Superman. So, of course, he's still unformed. I don't think he even has a name at the beginning of it. He's still just, Clark Kent flying around in a costume.
Mhm.
It's really cute and unspirited in a way that the character should be. I mean, Superman is, you said it, he's an inherently optimistic character. He's a good guy, but there can be a price to that, which we see in the third act of Donner's movie. That scene again, yeah, that scene where he's in pain, he's got a kryptonite medallion, and Miss Tessmacher has to pull him out, and Reeve does not pretend it isn't hurting him. Like his agony is really like it's a choice, right? Like he's playing pain, but then of course he's someone who's never felt pain before,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
overwhelming, like an infant with a sore thumb.
And he's a man of his word, and that's like something people can like. She does in that moment take advantage of the fact that he's honest too. It's like, I know that there's a bigger threat, but this one's personal to me, so you have to fix it first if I'm helping you. And he does, like no one else would do that. Batman would not. He would like disable her immediately and go for the big threat. But Superman's like, well, shucks, I promised. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's and doesn't he even isn't that the scene where he says stand back before he flies up just because he cannot allow it's like it's aliens rules, he can't allow a human to come to harm through his own action or inaction, but he's so thoughtful
Mhm.
that he takes that pause. And again, I'm sure it's in the script, I'm sure it's all there, but Reeve channels it in such a way it's graceful. Like he gives everything that he does, even as Clark, even the silly stuff. We know that he doesn't really stumble. He doesn't really, there's that whole speech in Kill Bill, which Tarantino ripped off from somewhere else, probably Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex or something, about how Clark Kent is Superman's joke on the world. But he got it wrong. Like that's not Clark Kent. Clark Kent is Superman. It's not the other way around. He's just not pretending he's a goof. He's pretending to be his best self and caring on a level that he's not allowed himself to do as Clark, probably because he couldn't save his father. And that's his formative trauma, because that version of Clark, the stumbling, bumbling, still charismatic, still gentle, still considerate, but that version isn't the version that Jeff East is playing. Jeff East is playing Superman as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he learns that that's not who he is. He's not indestructible. He's not like he can be hurt. He just can't be harmed.
Yeah. And he's got, I mean, obviously put on a performance to blend in, but I don't think he's mocking humanity.
No, not at all. He loves humanity. Like that is like ultimately Superman's greatest tragedy is that he just can't be a person. That's what
Yeah.
Superman 2 is all about.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the worst possible time.
Yeah, I remember Superman 2. I loved it. And then only I felt like I was like cheating on Donner when I found out everything. I was like, now I got to figure out which scenes he directed and which scenes he didn't. But it's and I mean I obviously saw the Donner cut of Superman 2, but it's hard to really see it as a film. You know what I mean? It's like it's hobbled together in a weird way. It's an interesting experiment. I love that they did it,
Mhm.
even archivally, just to like see that footage and how it's put together. But yeah, it doesn't feel like a true film, unfortunately. But that's what happens, I guess, 30 years later.
Yeah, I'm glad we have it at all. But yeah, and I think ultimately that ending can't work twice. It,
Yeah, that's also very true. It's like you can't there that's beyond having your cake and eating it too. That's just looking like insane. You're thinking the audience won't remember.
yeah, we were there. The
Yeah.
citizens of
And this is a
Metropolis.
sequel. Yeah. We had to have watched that first.
Mhm. But I do like the idea of two, where all the failings in the first film are confronted and dealt with. All the questions that were raised are more or less answered. Um, and it ends in sacrifice. Like Clark can't have a normal life. He will always be needed. Some part of him will always be there. But in that, oh, I love that wink to the camera at the end. That's the cheesy part, I guess.
I love that though. Yeah, no, I think like that is to me cinema, and cinema of childhood is like they took you on this journey and then at the end it's like thanks for coming almost, and I love that so much. When we did Wolf Cop, at the end of Wolf Cop, after the credits, Wolf Cop looks at the camera before he goes and like mauls the guy to death. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a connection between the viewer and the film. It's the it's not irony, right? Like it's self-awareness and it's celebration, I think, to give something back to the audience at the end of a movie, especially a movie that requires your investment. I mean, on some level, both Wolf Cop and Superman are asking people to believe something that is absolutely preposterous for the length of time you're in your seat. And if you plug in, you are rewarded. The Wolf Cop movies are they're charming as hell. They know exactly what they are, right? Like,
Less of a time commitment too.
yeah, sure. Are they both shorter together than the first Superman? I can't.
I bet you if you watched both Wolf Cops back to back, credits included, he'd be in Metropolis, but I don't think it would be over yet. Yeah,
Oh man, I'll have
but
to
with slightly different budgets too. That usually impacts the length of the film.
yeah, there is that. It's oh, it's such a pleasure to talk about this stuff, and in a world that's finally caught up to what he was going for, I think
Yeah,
is even better because the best movies, whether they're genre or not, the best movies create a world, trap you in it, or invite you into it, and sustain. And there's so much attention paid to the script, and it's because they reworked it forever. They took forever to get the drafts right, and just the idea that Mario Puzo was involved is preposterous to me. But it's just people
here
people throwing money at the man of the moment, and they wanted a blockbuster, and he wrote the book that became The Godfather. Therefore, he could give them a blockbuster.
the Salkins clearly didn't look too far. They're like, and who was in that movie? Okay, he's Jor-El.
Yeah, well, they wanted James Caan for Superman at one point, which I find absolutely insane.
It's tone deaf.
He said he couldn't wear the suit. Like he couldn't believe himself in the suit. And nothing against James Caan. He's a great. He would have been fine, I think, if with Donner, like they would have found a way to do it. But
Um,
you don't cast James Caan as Clark,
yeah.
right? You cast him as Superman. But by casting Reeve, they get Clark right first, and then the rest of it is just
I think that's the harder part to nail. I think like if I was casting Superman, I would absolutely be looking for someone who had fluency with humor and movement, and someone who I mean I think it's smoke and mirrors to make a great Superman. Can you go to the gym and can you be stoic, But I think Clark is the harder thing to nail by far, personally.
yeah. I've said this before. Jay Cheel picked Superman 3, which is a really fascinating episode if you haven't heard it. But I'm pretty sure it came up there. It's like the reason I was excited about Tim Burton's Superman was that Nicolas Cage was going to play Clark Kent and he would have some thoughts. Like that
Yeah.
is an interpretation I would love to see.
That I would have rather had that movie than half the sequels and prequels we've had since then because it would have at least been original. It would have at least been weird. And yeah, I think Nicolas Cage is obviously a very interesting, brilliant actor, and he would have brought something so different to those two characters. It would have been fun. It's a travesty that he only exists in that weird Flash end sequence.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. That's
Yeah.
just I again, heart's in the right place, but the language is wrong and the expressions are weird and it's just that felt more like fan service than anything else. Um, that DC has produced, and they've done some real fan service. But the idea that, I guess it's just the lack of a controlling hand really in the whole thing. There was no consistent vision, and they made a mess of almost everything. But when they got stuff right, it felt like it set everything else into relief and made it all feel like wasted opportunities. The first Wonder Woman is really, really solid. Both Aquaman movies seem to have a sense of what Jason Momoa wants to do in character, and are willing to go for that ride with him. I really wanted to like The Flash. I did. Ezra Miller has an interesting take, and then they just go ahead and front load it with everybody else. Like, The Flash doesn't need to host other heroes in his movie, especially when we know it's not going anywhere.
It goes back to confidence, I think, in the material and the story and what that character needs to be. And yeah, obviously they didn't have confidence in that version of the Flash, or that audiences would show up. They're like, but Batman's here, trust us. And it's the Batman you like, you know? So it's yeah, it's we're getting to like a absurd level of fan service for comic book movies. And that's why I always go back to Superman, because I'm someone who, like, the reason I want to make movies, the reason I fell in love with watching movies and the magic that goes into making them was that film. And I used to dream of making a comic book movie. And then now it's like, what's the point? It's like, here's the fifth version of this character this year, you know? So I hope they space them out a bit more, or at least put a little more thought into letting them be individual, standalone things versus puzzle pieces.
Yeah, I'm hoping Gunn nails it. It would be really nice to have a properly good Superman movie. It would be the first one in 20 odd years. And, well, 20, let's say. And we need it. Like, we need, culturally, I think we need a good Superman movie just to prove that the character still is relevant, because I believe that he is. And I think that it's possible to do it without Reeve, but with Reeve as a guidepost, as you know, you're not trying to get away from him. You can't, I don't think, get away from him anymore than you could get away from. Okay, now I'm locking up. I was going to say some other actor as some other hero, but no, actually, Christopher Reeve is the perfect example, and only perfect example so far. Like, Downey as Iron Man is perfect casting for an established personality, the same way Paul Rudd as Ant-Man is, and that was all really well done. But Reeve was an unknown. Reeve came out of nowhere and just did it, to the point where every other performance was kind of less interesting from him by comparison, because he wasn't given the opportunity to play the range that he played as in the dual role of Clark Kent and Superman. And I mean, who knows what he would have done if he'd lived longer, hadn't had the accident. Have you seen the documentary?
I watched it last week, actually. It was great, and what's interesting is it really put the man in 3D. You know, like I had for sure put him on a pedestal as being like my childhood hero. So it's very honest. You see that he's not a perfect man in any stretch. You see a lot of failures as a partner, as a parent, and I came away thinking more of him. You know, he's human. He's human. And that's the thing. It's like, we have to remind ourselves because he played Superman.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable too that a movie now could be made about him and still surprise. Like, I mean, there's been biographies. There's an autobiography out there somewhere. I think there's a history of all of it. But yeah, the footage makes it's beautifully edited. It takes us on that history and shows us the clearest possible portrait, and the fact that the family participated in it and was all open to it. It's great. I think
it's honest. It's more honest than I was expecting. And you're right. We've seen it all before. To anybody who has even one or two of the Superman collections, which I have several, I've watched all the 2-hour documentaries. I know all the stories. So to be surprised with more human stuff was a nice treat. And it was just, like, obviously heartbreaking.
Yeah, I'm glad it's out there. There is still no physical edition, which is very annoying, but you know, someday maybe it'll probably just get tacked. Yeah, it'll get tacked onto the next Superman box set, I hope, because at least it's all under Warner's umbrella. Although, of course, Warner's doing a terrible job of protecting their properties. Although, yeah, we'll always have Superman movies because they make money when you reissue them. So, yeah, I also have all the new editions and from my cold dead hands. I'm trying to figure out a way to segue this to your own work.
I mean, people are in spandex, people are in costumes fighting,
Yeah. Is there anything though? Is there a guiding light or some piece of Superman the movie that you've used in your own work or referenced or even just sort of fallen back on?
Not specifically. I would say the big thing, however, honestly, is tone, is taking things a certain way. Like I like to do really absurd stuff and take it very seriously, and I think I learned that from that movie.
Okay. And yeah, what would your ideal Superman movie be, assuming that everything fell into your lap and you could do whatever you want?
It would be an undisclosed era. I wouldn't be setting it in the present. I wouldn't be setting it in the past. I'd go vagaries of like the Indiana Jones era, but I would also be aggressively practical. I would want to, I mean, you're obviously using some kind of volume wall, but I would want to figure out ways to really make the flying feel realistic and not just like a CGI fest. And the most important thing to me is tone. I would want to the relationship between Lois and Clark is everything. And the thing that I just fell so hard in love with in the original, which I didn't realize was like more like Hawks films, is the banter, the His Girl Friday, like the back and forth. So I would want to just have such richness of performance, richness of dialogue, richness of editing, richness of blocking. I would want it to be the kind of movie where your eyes are like, what's happening? How do I keep up? Who's talking to who? And then, fall into those two-page comic book spread slow down pauses where you actually milk in for a moment a man floating in the sky, and then the insane speeds at which he moves and just hope, just to bake in hope. So it would be all about the performances and the practicality and being joyful, like it's I think anybody who grew up with the Donner one or loves it would use it as a flagpole because why wouldn't you? Because that's how movies are just to make you feel something, right? And I don't want to go into a Superman movie and feel like, yeah, kill him. I want to be like, just hope. And now more than ever, I actually think we need a beacon of hope and morality and someone saying, I know this world is dark, but I'm not going to just punish people. I'm not going to turn a blind eye. I'm actually going to help you and lead, hopefully by example. I'll never lie, flying is still safe, all those things.
That's right. What are the odds?
Yeah, exactly.
My thanks to Lowell Dean, whose new film Dark Match debuts on Shudder in the US and invades Canadian theaters this Friday, January 31st. Lowell and his cast will be doing Q&As at select screenings across the country, and you can find that schedule at darkmatch.com. His other new movie, Die Alone, opens later this year. Thanks also to Laura Steen. She knows what she did. You can find Lowell on Blue Sky at Lollofilm, Lollofilm, and you can find Superman on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment in all sorts of special editions. It's also streaming on Crave in Canada and Max in the US, and available to rent or buy on various VOD services in North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.